Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So Terence Crawford defeats Israil Madrimov to become the new WBA Super Welterweight Champion of the world, in doing so becoming a 4-weight world champion. I believe he also picked up the WBO Interim Super Welterweight title, for what that's worth. Have to say, this fight was competitive, it was well fought. Both guys were very tuned in, very locked in from what I was seeing. Seemed like they had a lot of respect for each other throughout this bout. And it was a technical chess match, I would say, throughout most of this bout. And yeah, overall, I actually thought it was quite an interesting fight watching it live. It's not a fight I'll go back and watch, but in the moment, it was quite an interesting fight. I was kind of surprised that the crowd were booing, to be honest, but it is what it is. Crawford came out in this fight as the southpaw. Obviously, he fights in both stances. I will say, though, before actually, Crawford looked bigger in there to me, by the way, which was interesting. But Crawford came out as the southpaw. Initially, Madrimov was showing Crawford a lot of upper body movements, a lot of feints early on, while trying to apply pressure. However, in the early rounds, I felt Madrimov was guilty of waiting too long, not letting his hands go enough. I think he was trying to draw Crawford in so he could throw the overhand right, and Madrimov had success with that shot later in the fight, but in the first few rounds, I felt Madrimov was a little too cautious. The feints were okay, I guess, but there was no jab there from Madrimov. There was no jab, so Crawford could take the half step back in the early rounds, boxing out of a southpaw stance, and he was landing the jab on a fairly regular occurrence. Not too much was happening in the early rounds, but Crawford was dictating. Crawford was the guy keeping it at range while being active with his lead hand, and I felt Madrimov was guilty of following Crawford a little too much with not enough punching. There were times when he would target the body of Crawford with the jab or the straight right, but ultimately I felt Crawford was the guy who was dictating the early rounds in this fight, first 4 rounds, primarily based on that jab, but he would fire the straight left behind it, occasionally go down to the body, put 2 or 3 shots together and reset. He was being made to work Crawford, but for me he won the early rounds quite clearly. Madrimov after round 4 had a really good round 5, actually split the guard of Terence Crawford with his overhand and straight right hand. And it caused a bit of swelling under Crawford's eye in round 5. Immediately after Madrimov landed the shot, you saw slight swelling start to appear. And he was a little more active in round 5, Madrimov, with particularly his right hand. But yeah, I felt round 5 was a pretty good round for Madrimov. Crawford still had success, especially with some body shots. But yeah, round 5, Madrimov did pretty well. And from this point on, it turned into a tit-for-tat fight for a few rounds. I felt Madrimov would have a good round, then Crawford would have a good round. Madrimov was getting closer with his overhand right. Also, at times, he was sneaking in the uppercut against Crawford when he would throw it after the right hand, again splitting the guard of Crawford. Crawford on the other hand, was mounting some good body attacks, some hard shots to the body, hooks around the guard of Madrimov. And it was very tit-for-tat, I felt, for several rounds. Both guys were picking up rounds, in my opinion. And from rounds sort of 6 to 10, what I liked about these rounds were somebody would have a good moment or land a couple of good shots, and the other guy would always try to answer back with something. It wasn't high output, but when somebody would go through the gears for a few seconds, the opponent would also try to do the same thing. So if Madrimov landed a couple of good shots, Crawford would come back with good shots of his own. It was really tit for tat, I felt. Madrimov, though, again, for me, his main issue was the reach disadvantage. So when there was a lull in the action and both guys were kind of standing on the outside, Crawford always had his southpaw jab to fall back on to pick up points, whereas Madrimov on the outside was just primarily feinting using upper body movement, but he wasn't punching that much with the jab. So this allowed Crawford to pick up points and land shots. And also the jab was pretty effective in general because Although Crawford had swelling on one of his eyes, Madrimov's left eye was marked up by Crawford's right jab. But yeah, both guys were having their moments. I think Madrimov would have been wise to try to go to the body a little more. Maybe to try and slow the legs down of Crawford. But the issue with that is, Crawford's a good counter-puncher, particularly with the uppercut. And sometimes I was actually surprised that Crawford wasn't throwing the uppercut more, because there were several times in this fight when Madrimov would fire the overhand right or the straight right. He'd fire it from outside and he would sometimes fall in, like his head would go over his lead knee. So the uppercut was there for Crawford, but he really didn't use that shot too much. He did land it, but I felt Crawford could have done a better job of throwing more uppercuts. I think that could have been very fruitful in this fight for him. But yeah, both guys were showing a lot of respect to each other, in my opinion. Both guys were showing a lot of respect to each other. The last 2 rounds, I felt Crawford came out and showed that experience, showed that 12-round experience. He closed the fight out well, in my opinion. Especially round 12, he kind of set his feet and started to let go of power shots. He caught Madrimov with some hooks around the side. Made Madrimov hold on for a couple of moments here and there. Crawford finished this fight stronger. And to be honest, when I watched it live, I wasn't scoring it round by round. But when I was watching it live, it was very competitive throughout. But I always had the sense that Crawford was a step ahead kind of thing, you know what I mean? Madrimov won rounds, and the scorecards reflect that, believe it or not. The scorecards were actually pretty fair in my opinion. But yeah, I always felt Crawford was like a step ahead. And yeah, him winning the decision, in my opinion, was deserved. In regards to his actual performance, I've seen a little bit of reaction online, not too much, but I've seen a little bit, and it seems to be quite negative, but I felt this was a pretty good boxing match. I felt Madrimov was possibly the most dangerous guy Crawford's fought. To be honest, more dangerous than Spence, more dangerous than Porter. Mainly because Madrimov is a guy who is in his prime, who's not like got one foot out the door, or coming off a car crash, etc., or struggling to make weight. Madrimov for me has been the first sort of real, like truly prime guy at a good level Crawford's fought in a little while. And I do rate Madrimov. There's things I've questioned about him, like the unnecessary movement, etc., things like that. But I do rate Madrimov, to be honest. And yeah, I felt overall it was a decent performance by Crawford. Wasn't a star, but I don't think it was necessarily bad either. One thing I will say is, this may be Terence Crawford's ceiling, 154. There was a couple of times where Madrimov had to hold on after getting caught. Like he was not rocked per se, but had to take a second kind of thing. So maybe the power's not quite what it was at 147, at 154. And there's much bigger guys at 154 than Madrimov, Much bigger guys. Guys like Fundora, Tim Zhu, etc. Even Virgil Ortiz. So yeah, I mean, we'll see where he goes from here. What would I like to see next from Terence Crawford? I'm not interested in the Canelo fight, to be honest. I'd rather see Crawford fight. I mean, if Virgil Ortiz beats Boachuk, that's a good fight for me. Jaron Ennis, that's a good fight. These are the sort of fights I'd like to see Crawford take, to be honest. Canelo, I'm not particularly interested in it as of right now. But yeah, share your thoughts below. Beanie Guy Del Boy, peace.